The uninvited visitor. The city hummed with a low murmur of traffic and distant voices as Jake Larson gazed out the small window of his one-bedroom apartment. His world was comfortably confined to the glow of screens, the soft hum of cooling fans, and the cluttered array of gadgets and cables that covered his desk. Jake, in his mid-20s, had long traded bustling social life for the quiet satisfaction of coding, experimenting with electronics, and piecing together random bits of tech he'd scavenged over the years. But that Thursday evening was different. In the corner of his eye, a peculiar flash streaked across the night sky, trailing a subtle shimmer as it descended, almost too quick to notice, but there. Curious, Jake pushed his chair back and walked to the window, scanning the night for any sign of what he'd seen. Just as he was about to chalk it up to fatigue, a loud crash erupted from his living room, shattering his peaceful bubble. Jake's heart raced as he cautiously approached the source of the sound. His mind spun with possibilities: an intruder, a freak accident, maybe even a wild animal. But when he reached the living room, he froze in shock. Amidst a sea of broken glass and his overturned bookshelf, he saw her. At first glance, she looked human, but a closer look revealed otherwise. Her skin emitted a faint, silvery glow, and her hair fell in soft waves of metallic blue that sparkled like the night sky. As Jake took a step closer, the woman stirred, opening her eyes to reveal a striking shade of teal, swirling with flecks of gold. Who are you?" Jake managed to stammer, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of his apartment. "Human," she muttered, almost in disbelief, her gaze darting around as if to orient herself. She spoke in a low, melodic tone that sent shivers down Jake's spine. After a pause, she pushed herself up, her movements graceful yet slightly disoriented. "I am Zephyr from the Orana Galaxy. I was on a mission. Something went wrong, and now I'm here, in what I assume is your dwelling." Jake nodded, still trying to grasp the situation. You're an alien." His question hung in the air, both surreal and thrilling. Jake had always imagined life beyond Earth, but meeting an extraterrestrial being, let alone one in his living room, was a scenario far beyond his wildest dreams. Zephyr's gaze sharpened. "Yes, I am Oranian. My spacecraft experienced a malfunction, and I had to initiate an emergency teleportation sequence. Unfortunately, I landed here, right through your ceiling." Jake blinked, noticing a small charred area on his ceiling where her teleportation device must have activated. "Well, you're lucky you didn't end up halfway through a wall," he replied, more out of nerves than humor. Zephyr tilted her head, studying him intently. "You seem unfazed by my presence, human." Jake chuckled nervously. "Honestly, I'm trying not to freak out," he admitted. "I mean, you're an actual alien, and you're in my apartment. Should I be worried?" "Only if you intend to hinder my mission," she replied, a faint edge to her voice. Then her expression softened, and she let out a sigh. "Although I suppose I do require some assistance. My ship is damaged, and I can't contact my people without a working transmitter." Jake's curiosity flared up. He wasn't just a programmer. He had a knack for fixing things, piecing together bits and pieces of tech. The idea of repairing alien technology felt like a challenge he couldn't refuse. "I might be able to help," he offered cautiously, rubbing the back of his neck. "I mean, I've never fixed a spaceship, but I'm pretty good with tech. It's worth a shot, right?" Zephyr's gaze softened, and for a moment, Jake saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "You'd be willing to try. This is not your responsibility, and it could be dangerous." Jake shrugged. "I guess I'm just curious. Besides, you don't exactly seem like the type to be here on a mission to conquer Earth. So, why not? Let's give it a shot." A hint of a smile curved at the edge of Zephyr's lips. "Very well, Jake Larson. But know this, failure is not an option. My people cannot know I've been stranded here. If they send a retrieval team, it could be problematic." Jake's brow furrowed. "Problematic how?" Oranians have strict protocols, she replied, her tone grave. If they locate me here, they'll erase any trace of my presence, including any humans involved. Jake's pulse quickened, realizing the gravity of her words. So, if we don't get you out of here before they come looking, they'll kill me. Zephyr nodded sullenly. Yes, I'm afraid so. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their predicament settling over them. But as the fear subsided, Jake felt a surge of determination. Well then, we better get to work, right? He gave her a reassuring nod, trying to mask his own anxiety with bravado. The next few days passed in a blur. Zephyr led Jake to her ship, a small, sleek pod partially buried in the forest just outside the city. Together, they salvaged parts, hauling back alien technology piece by piece to Jake's apartment, which quickly transformed into a makeshift lab. Cables and circuits sprawled across the floor alongside strange, metallic devices covered in symbols Jake couldn't decipher. Zephyr showed him how to handle the equipment with patience, though her worry was clear as the days slipped by. Despite her initial doubts, Zephyr was impressed by Jake's quick grasp of complex systems. Although he couldn't fully understand Oranian technology, his creative approach and problem-solving abilities proved useful. They worked late into the night, tirelessly tinkering and troubleshooting, the urgency of their mission growing with each passing hour. One evening, as they worked side by side in the dim light of Jake's apartment, Zephyr paused, her gaze lingering on him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "Your methods are unusual," she observed, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake chuckled, scratching his head. "I guess human technology isn't as advanced as yours, but I do what I can with what I have." Zephyr's expression softened. "It's not that. Your curiosity, your resilience, it's rare even among my people." Caught off guard, Jake felt a warmth spread through him. "Well, I've always been fascinated by the unknown," he replied, smiling. "And you're the most unknown thing I've ever encountered." Zephyr's cheeks flushed faintly, her glow intensifying as she looked away. Perhaps there's more to humans than we once believed." A comfortable silence settled between them, and for a moment, Jake forgot the danger looming over them. But Zephyr quickly turned back to the device she was working on, her voice tense once more. "We're running out of time, Jake. If we don't establish contact with my people soon, they'll send a retrieval team. And if they find you here, there will be no mercy." Jake's face grew serious. "Then we'll make sure they don't have to come looking. We'll get you back home, Zephyr. I promise." As they continued their work, a newfound bond formed between them, a connection born from desperation, curiosity, and the strange, unexplainable pull they felt toward one another. And though neither dared to acknowledge it aloud, both knew that their fates were now intertwined, bound by the secrets they shared and the unyielding resolve to see this mission through to the end. The heat of a hidden connection. The sun had barely risen, casting a dim light over the city, when Jake and Zephyr found themselves once again knee-deep in alien tech, navigating through piles of parts and broken circuits that covered every inch of Jake's living room floor. Over the past few days, their work had transformed his apartment into a makeshift lab. Wires and blinking lights sprawled across every surface, the faint hum of strange devices filling the air. As Jake tweaked a damaged panel under Zephyr's guidance, he noticed her glancing at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Her usually composed demeanor seemed off, her cheeks faintly flushed with that otherworldly glow. Jake couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern as he watched her fidget, something distinctly unlike the stoic alien he'd come to know. "Zephyr," he asked, setting down his tools, "are you feeling okay? You seem different today." She hesitated, looking away as if weighing her response. "I've never experienced anything like this before, Jake," she admitted, her voice a barely audible whisper. "In my world, emotions and connections are carefully regulated. Oranians aren't supposed to experience this." She gestured between them, her gaze briefly meeting his before darting away. Jake's pulse quickened as her words settled in. "You mean like a bond?" He felt ridiculous even suggesting it, but the idea wasn't entirely out of place given the strange connection that seemed to be growing between them. "Yes," she replied, her eyes fixed on the small device in her hand as though it could distract her from the truth. "In my culture, emotions as intense as these are rare. But with you, it's like I can't control it. My body, my emotions, they're reacting in ways I've never felt before." She let out a shuddering breath, her hand trembling slightly. Jake felt a surge of warmth and a deep, strange protectiveness. "You don't have to hide it from me, Zephyr. I know I'm just a human, but if this connection means something to you, it means something to me too." Zephyr's gaze softened, her alien beauty bathed in the soft morning light. "Jake, this is dangerous, for both of us. Oranians aren't meant to bond with other species. If my people discover this," she trailed off, a look of dread crossing her face. "Then we'll make sure they don't," Jake replied firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you, Zephyr. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." She gave him a grateful nod, her cheeks flushing again with that iridescent glow. A silence settled between them, charged with an intensity neither could quite articulate. Jake felt himself drawn to her in a way that defied explanation, as though some unseen force was pulling them closer with each passing day. Zephyr cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "We should focus on the transmitter," she said, her tone more composed. "I've recalibrated it to bypass our intergalactic relay, but we still need a power source strong enough to send a signal beyond this solar system." Jake nodded, snapping back to their mission. "Let me see if I can rig up something powerful enough." He moved toward the pile of tools and tech, his mind racing with ideas. Hours passed in a blur of focused work. They took apart broken machines, salvaged parts from old devices, and built a crude but effective power source from a mix of human and Oranian technology. Jake felt the thrill of the challenge as they worked side by side, Zephyr's calm guidance keeping him on track. But even with their combined efforts, the transmitter refused to power up. Frustration etched across Zephyr's face as she tested the device again, only to be met with silence. "This isn't working," she muttered, her voice laced with urgency. "If we don't find a solution soon, my people will assume I've defected, or worse, that I'm compromised. They won't risk leaving me here." Jake's mind raced. "What if we use the city's power grid?" he suggested. "I could hack into it, divert enough energy to boost the signal." Zephyr's eyes widened with a mix of admiration and apprehension. "That could work," she said slowly, "but it's a huge risk. If you're caught tampering with your power grid, there could be severe consequences." Jake shrugged. "If it means getting you back to your people safely, I think it's worth it." Together, they mapped out a plan. Jake would tap into a nearby power substation, channeling enough energy to their transmitter without setting off any alarms. It was a risky, complex operation, and both knew that even the slightest misstep could draw attention they didn't need. But they were running out of options. As dusk fell, Jake finished connecting the last of the wires, glancing over at Zephyr. "Are you ready?" he asked, feeling the weight of the moment. She nodded, her gaze steady. "Let's do this." Jake took a deep breath, his fingers poised over his laptop. With a final nod from Zephyr, he initiated the hack, his screen filling with lines of code as he bypassed the security protocols and began siphoning power from the grid. The room dimmed slightly as the lights flickered, and the hum of the transmitter grew louder, a faint glow emanating from its core. Zephyr's eyes fixed on the device, hope and tension warring on her face. The transmitter's hum intensified, a soft whirring filling the air as it began to establish a signal. But then, just as it seemed to reach its peak, a sharp, piercing noise erupted from the device, followed by a cascade of sparks. Jake lunged forward, yanking the power cable free before the entire setup could catch fire. Zephyr cursed softly in her native tongue, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's not enough," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even with the additional power, the transmitter can't hold the signal. We need a stronger source." Jake sank to the floor beside her, running a hand through his hair. "There's got to be something we're missing," he said, frustration lacing his voice. "Something that can bridge the gap." They sat in silence, each lost in thought, when Zephyr's gaze shifted toward him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Jake," she said slowly, reaching out to place a hand on his shoulder. "I appreciate what you're doing for me. Few would take such risks, especially for someone they barely know." Jake looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "You're not just someone, Zephyr," he replied softly. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I've known you my whole life." For a moment, neither of them moved. Jake felt the warmth of her hand on his shoulder, the strange, magnetic pull between them growing stronger. He knew the risks, knew that even acknowledging these feelings could spell disaster for both of them. But in that moment, all he wanted was to close the distance between them. And then, as if sensing his thoughts, Zephyr leaned closer, her face inches from his. The air between them was electric, a charged silence hanging in the balance. But before either could act, a loud beep broke the moment, the transmitter lighting up with a faint, flickering signal. Zephyr pulled back, her focus snapping to the device. "It's working," she exclaimed, her voice filled with sudden hope. Jake scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding as he watched the transmitter struggle to hold the signal. Zephyr's fingers danced over the controls, her eyes fixed on the screen as she calibrated the settings with a practiced ease. But just as the signal began to stabilize, the power flickered again, and the transmitter fell silent. Zephyr's shoulders slumped, disappointment etched into every line of her face. "We were so close," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet despair. Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll find another way, Zephyr. I won't give up until you're safe." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "Thank you, Jake," she murmured, "for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." They shared a quiet moment, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging between them. But with the threat of time looming ever closer, both knew that there was no time to dwell on what lay beneath the surface. As night fell, they returned to their work, their resolve stronger than ever. They would face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. And though neither knew what the future held, they both sensed that their journey was only just beginning. The spark of unseen forces. The night was heavy with an uneasy quiet as Jake and Zephyr continued to pore over their makeshift transmitter, determined to find a solution. Jake's apartment, now dimly lit by a few scattered lamps and the soft glow of alien technology, felt like a hidden refuge from the rest of the world. Wires and equipment were strewn across the floor, reflecting the chaotic urgency of their mission. Each failed attempt weighed heavier on their shoulders, but Jake could see something else in Zephyr's eyes, an unspoken tension that went beyond the stress of their predicament. Zephyr looked up from a panel she was modifying, her teal eyes locking onto Jake's with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. She seemed on the edge of saying something, her gaze unreadable, before she looked away again, focusing intently on her work. Jake's curiosity flared, but he knew better than to pry. He had come to respect Zephyr's guarded nature, sensing that her world and emotions were vastly different from his own. "Jake," she finally spoke, breaking the silence, "I think I might have found a temporary fix for the transmitter, but it's risky. It involves creating an energy conduit, which could stabilize the signal, but the human power grid might not be able to handle the strain." "An energy conduit," Jake echoed, trying to visualize the setup she described. "You mean like a direct link between the transmitter and an external power source?" "Exactly," Zephyr nodded, her tone more confident now. "I can channel the energy using an Oranian technique called a bioresonant link, essentially using a part of my own energy to amplify the signal. It's temporary, but it could give us the time we need." Jake's eyes widened. "Are you saying you'd be the power source?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady yet carrying a hint of trepidation. "But if I miscalculate even slightly, it could harm me." He stared at her, feeling a strange mix of admiration and dread. "Zephyr, I can't let you risk your life like that. Isn't there any other way? Zephyr's gaze softened, and she gave him a small, reassuring smile. Jake, there's no other choice. If I can get even a faint message to my people, they can prepare a rescue without deploying a team. It's a calculated risk. Jake took a deep breath, realizing there was no talking her out of it. Then let's make it as safe as possible. I'll reinforce the connections and insulate everything to reduce the feedback. They worked side by side, each movement synchronized in their shared urgency. The energy in the room was palpable, a quiet tension laced with an understanding that went beyond words. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that whatever connection he felt with Zephyr was deepening, like an invisible thread weaving their fates together. As they completed the final adjustments, Zephyr looked over at him, a hint of unease flickering across her face. Jake, before we proceed, there's something I need to explain. This bioresonant link isn't just a technical process. It's a part of me. The energy I channel will come from my core, and sharing it will create a bond between us, one that can't be easily undone. Jake's heart pounded at her words, the gravity of her revelation settling in. What kind of bond? He asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. In Oranian culture, this link is sacred, she continued, her gaze steady. It's reserved for those we trust deeply, for partnerships that go beyond the physical. If we do this, Jake, I'll carry a part of you within me, and you'll carry a part of me. For a moment, Jake was speechless. The concept was almost too vast to comprehend, yet a part of him felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if this bond was something he'd been searching for his entire life. Sapphire, if this is what it takes to keep you safe, I'll do it. I trust you. A faint glow shimmered around Zephyr, her face softening with something akin to relief. Thank you, Jake, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I promise to protect you in return. They positioned themselves next to the transmitter, Zephyr taking a deep breath as she placed her hand on its surface. Jake stood beside her, following her instructions as she guided him through the connection process. Her hand brushed against his, and he felt a jolt, a pulse of warmth that spread from his fingertips up his arm. It was unlike anything he'd ever felt, a comforting heat that seemed to awaken something deep within him. Zephyr closed her eyes, her breathing steady as she began the process. The room seemed to shimmer with a soft, ethereal glow as a faint energy field formed around them. Jake felt a strange resonance in his own body, like a distant hum that grew stronger with each passing second, connecting them on a level beyond the physical. The transmitter began to vibrate, the hum intensifying as Zephyr channeled her energy into it. Her face was calm, but Jake could see the strain beneath her serene expression, the faint tremor in her hands as she maintained the link. He reached out, placing his hand over hers in silent support. And then, just as the signal stabilized, a surge of energy jolted through them both. Zephyr gasped, her grip tightening on his hand as a wave of heat radiated from her core, filling the room with a shimmering light. Jake felt the warmth course through him, like a flame igniting within, and he realized with a shock that he could feel her emotions, her fear, her determination, and, beneath it all, a sense of trust and vulnerability she had never shown him before. The transmitter's light brightened, the hum reaching a fever pitch as the connection held steady. Jake glanced at Zephyr, his breath catching as he saw her eyes glowing, a reflection of the powerful energy she was channeling. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a glimpse into the raw strength of her alien nature. But just as the signal reached its peak, a sudden jolt shook the transmitter, the feedback sending a shock through their linked hands. Zephyr cried out, her face contorted in pain as she struggled to maintain control. Jake gritted his teeth, tightening his grip on her hand as he tried to ground her, to share the burden of the energy flowing between them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the transmitter emitted a faint chime, signaling the successful transmission. Zephyr exhaled, her body slumping against Jake as the light faded, leaving them both breathless and drained. Jake held her, his heart pounding as he felt the lingering warmth of their bond, a presence that now felt inseparable from his own. Zephyr looked up at him, her face pale but filled with gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, her voice shaky but triumphant. "They'll receive my signal. They'll know I'm safe." Jake smiled, relief flooding through him. "Then it was worth it," he replied softly, his gaze never leaving hers. In that moment, he felt a profound connection with her, a bond that transcended their differences and the circumstances that had brought them together. They sat in silence, the weight of their shared experience settling over them. Jake could feel the faint resonance of their bond, an unspoken understanding that had taken root deep within his soul, and though they both knew the dangers that still lay ahead, the bond gave him a sense of hope, a belief that they could face whatever challenges awaited them together. As the night wore on, they eventually drifted into a quiet sleep, side by side, the warmth of their connection a comforting reminder of the journey they had embarked on. And as they slept, the faint echo of Zephyr's signal traveled through the stars, a beacon that would guide her people to Earth and, with any luck, lead them both to safety. But as they rested, neither of them realized that their signal had not gone unnoticed. Far across the galaxy, a response was already being prepared, one that would test the strength of their bond and the resilience of their newfound alliance. And though they had succeeded in reaching out, the true challenge was only just beginning, as forces beyond their comprehension prepared to converge upon them. The gathering storm. The morning after their breakthrough, Jake awoke to the soft glow of dawn seeping through his window. He found Zephyr already awake, sitting cross-legged beside the now quiet transmitter. Her eyes were distant, her expression troubled, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. The apartment felt oddly still, the calm before an unseen storm. "Zephyr," Jake said softly, his voice laced with concern. "Did the signal reach your people?" She turned to him, nodding, but her gaze held an unease that made his heart skip a beat. "Yes, the signal was received, but something feels off. They should have responded by now, but I haven't sensed anything." She glanced away, her brows knit in worry. If they received it, they're either preparing a response or delaying for a reason. A chill ran down Jake's spine. "What kind of reason?" he asked, afraid of the answer. Zephyr's face was shadowed with a tension he hadn't seen before. It could mean one of two things. Either they're planning a careful extraction to avoid detection, or they've deemed me compromised and will be sending a containment team instead. The weight of her words hung in the air, a reminder of the danger they were still in. Jake's mind raced. "Containment? You mean they would wipe everything out here, wouldn't they?" Zephyr's silence was answer enough. She looked at him, her expression softening as she reached out to touch his hand. "Jake, I'm sorry. I didn't want to bring you into this, but now, if they view me as a threat, they won't hesitate. My people's methods are ruthless when it comes to protecting the galaxy's balance." Jake swallowed, forcing himself to stay calm. "Then we need a backup plan. We can't just sit around and wait for them to decide our fate. If they're coming, we need to be ready." Zephyr nodded, her determination rekindling. "You're right. We need to prepare. But first, there's something I need to tell you, something I've kept hidden because I wasn't sure how you'd react." She took a steadying breath before continuing. "Jake, Oranians aren't just an advanced species. We have a form of power that goes beyond technology, an energy source within us that can be unpredictable if not controlled. It's what I use to create the bioresonant link, but in high-stress situations, it can also act as a defense mechanism. If my people arrive and sense any instability in me, they'll deem me hazardous." Jake felt his pulse quicken as he processed her words. "You're saying your people could see you as a threat because of this energy?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Oranian Council is highly cautious with those who exhibit these powers outside of regulated environments. They believe it disrupts the order they've built, and any irregularities must be eliminated." A silence settled over them as the implications sank in. Jake's mind spun with possibilities, ways they could evade detection, but the reality was daunting. They were up against an interstellar council with technology and resources far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Still, he wasn't ready to give up. "Zephyr," he said, his voice steady, "whatever happens, I'm not letting them take you. We'll figure this out." She looked at him, a flicker of hope breaking through her fear. "Then we need to act fast. I have an idea, but it requires taking a risk that could expose us. If we tap into one of their hidden energy frequencies, we might be able to generate a cloak of sorts, masking my signal and delaying their sensors from picking up my exact location." Jake nodded, the gears in his mind already turning. "Let's do it. I'll rig up whatever we need." He took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of their connection resonate within him, a silent promise of loyalty and strength. They set to work immediately, drawing from Zephyr's knowledge and Jake's creativity to create a crude but effective cloaking device. They assembled a framework from a mix of Earth technology and the remnants of Zephyr's equipment, connecting wires and circuits with precision and care. Hours passed in a blur, their focus absolute as they pushed the limits of their ingenuity. Finally, they activated the device, watching as a shimmering field enveloped the room, pulsing faintly. Zephyr adjusted the settings, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This should buy us some time," she murmured, her voice steady. "If they're looking for my signal, this cloak will redirect their sensors, keeping them from pinpointing our exact location." Jake felt a glimmer of hope. "That's one problem down then. But what about when they get here? Won't they search the area?" Zephyr's expression was somber. "Yes, but if we can avoid direct detection, we might be able to slip away before they suspect anything. I'll need to stay hidden and minimize any energy emissions. Even the smallest flare could give us away." They spent the next few hours refining their defenses, checking every connection and recalibrating every circuit to ensure their cloaking device would hold under scrutiny. The process was grueling, the tension between them building as the minutes slipped by, each second bringing them closer to a confrontation neither was certain they could avoid. As dusk settled over the city, Zephyr sat down beside Jake, exhaustion evident on her face. "Jake, I never expected to find someone like you, especially here, on Earth." She hesitated, her voice filled with emotion. "This connection we share, it's not just the bond. I feel safe with you." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy yet filled with an inexplicable warmth. "Zephyr, whatever happens, I'm with you. We're in this together." His hand found hers, and they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then, a faint hum echoed through the air, a sound that was almost imperceptible but unmistakably foreign. Jake's head snapped up, his eyes meeting Zephyr's. "Did you hear that?" Zephyr's face paled. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The council's containment team." Without a moment to lose, they scrambled to their feet, Jake grabbing the cloaking device and adjusting the settings to maximum power. They huddled together, each breath filled with tension as they waited, hoping their makeshift shield would hold. Outside, the hum grew louder, the unmistakable sound of alien technology descending upon them. Jake felt his heart pounding as shadows began to form just beyond the window, strange shapes moving with a calculated precision that sent chills down his spine. He glanced at Zephyr, who stood resolute, her face calm but her eyes blazing with defiance. "We won't let them take us," she whispered, her hand gripping his tightly. "Not now, not ever." The shadows circled their apartment, their movements slow and deliberate as they scanned for any trace of Zephyr's energy signature. The cloaking device flickered, the shimmering field surrounding them wavering slightly. Jake held his breath, praying the shield would hold. The shadows passed by the window, pausing for a brief moment before moving on. Jake felt a surge of relief, but Zephyr's grip on his hand remained tight, her gaze fixed on the shadows as they drifted away, disappearing into the night. For a long moment, they remained frozen, their breaths coming in shallow, measured gasps as they waited for any sign of danger. But the hum slowly faded, leaving only the quiet stillness of the night. Zephyr exhaled, her shoulders sagging as the tension ebbed away. "They didn't detect us," she murmured, her voice filled with both relief and disbelief. "We're safe for now." Jake released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, feeling a strange exhilaration mixed with fear. "We did it," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "They didn't find you." Zephyr gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thanks to you, Jake. I couldn't have done this without you." They stood in silence, their relief tempered by the knowledge that their reprieve was only temporary. The containment team would return, and next time, they might not be so fortunate. But as they looked at each other, a sense of quiet determination filled the air, a shared resolve that bound them together in a way neither had ever experienced. As the night stretched on, they sat side by side, their hands intertwined as they watched the stars, each lost in their own thoughts. They both knew that the real test still lay ahead, a trial that would push them to the limits of their courage and strength. But for now, in the quiet stillness of their fragile peace, they found solace in each other's presence, a silent promise that whatever the future held, they would face it together. An unbreakable alliance. The air was thick with tension as Jake and Zephyr prepared for the inevitable return of the Uranian containment team. Their brush with detection had shaken them both, but it had also ignited a fierce determination within them. Jake could feel it in Zephyr's grip, in the set of her jaw, and in the way she moved with purpose as they worked. There was no time to waste. If they wanted to survive, they needed to be one step ahead. They spent the following day reinforcing the cloaking device, modifying its circuits, and finding new ways to mask Zephyr's energy. Jake's apartment was in complete disarray, covered with alien technology and human electronics intertwined in a haphazard fusion of two worlds. As the hours passed, Jake marveled at Zephyr's resilience. She moved with a quiet grace, her focus unwavering despite the stakes, and her presence was a strange comfort to him in the chaos. Yet, amid the mounting pressure, Jake couldn't ignore the deepening connection he felt with her. It went beyond their shared bond or the circumstances forcing them together. It was something more profound, a magnetic force that drew him to her despite the unlikelihood of it all. He knew she felt it, too, from the lingering glances and the way her hand would sometimes brush against his, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. As dusk fell, Jake paused, rubbing his temples. He hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, and the strain was starting to wear on him. Zephyr noticed, her expression softening. "Jake, you need rest. You won't be able to keep going like this." He shook his head, forcing a smile. "I can't stop now. We're so close. Besides, I'm not leaving you to face this alone." Zephyr looked at him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Your loyalty is unusual," she said softly. "Where I come from, such trust is rare, especially with someone we've just met." Jake felt a warmth rise in his chest. "I'm just doing what feels right," he replied, his gaze steady. "You're more than just a mission, Zephyr. You're a friend, and maybe—" He hesitated, his words hanging in the air, but she seemed to understand, her eyes softening as she placed a hand over his. "Thank you, Jake," she whispered. "No matter what happens, I'm grateful for everything you've done." They shared a quiet moment, the weight of their circumstances softened by the silent promise between them. Then, as if sensing the need to shift focus, Zephyr cleared her throat, her tone turning practical. "We should finalize our plan. The containment team may return sooner than expected, and we'll need every advantage we can get." Jake nodded, snapping back to reality. "Agreed. I've been thinking, if we can create a decoy signal, something that looks like your energy signature but isn't, it might buy us time and mislead them long enough to make a real escape." Zephyr's eyes lit up with interest. "That's brilliant, Jake. I hadn't thought of that. If we can amplify the decoy just enough, they'll detect it and move toward the false signal, giving us time to flee." They got to work, assembling an improvised decoy system using parts from Zephyr's equipment and a few of Jake's own gadgets. It was a delicate operation requiring meticulous calibration to mimic her unique energy signature without emitting too much power. Jake worked with a steady focus, his mind racing with calculations and possibilities, while Zephyr guided him with precise instructions, her voice calm and sure. After hours of fine-tuning, the decoy was ready. Jake flipped a switch, and a faint hum filled the room as the device powered up. The small, blinking lights reflected off Zephyr's face, highlighting her intense concentration as she watched the readings. "It's working," she said, her voice laced with excitement. "The signal is stable and undetectable from the cloaked field we set up. If they scan for my energy signature, they'll pick up the decoy first." Jake let out a breath of relief, a grin spreading across his face. "We did it. Now we just need to position it far enough from here that they'll be led away." They decided to place the decoy in an abandoned industrial district on the outskirts of the city, where it would blend with the residual energy from old machinery. Under the cover of night, they slipped out of Jake's apartment, the decoy carefully packed in Jake's bag as they made their way through quiet streets. As they walked, Jake felt the weight of their mission press down on him. The city seemed foreign and surreal, the empty streets and darkened buildings a stark contrast to the monumental task they were undertaking. He stole a glance at Zephyr, her gaze forward and steady, her face illuminated by the occasional streetlight. She moved with a quiet confidence, yet he could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. When they reached the industrial district, they found a secure spot in an old, crumbling warehouse. Jake carefully set up the decoy, ensuring it was positioned to emit the signal at a subtle angle. Zephyr adjusted the device one final time, her fingers moving with precision over the controls. As they activated the decoy, a faint hum echoed through the empty space, blending with the sounds of distant traffic. Jake felt a surge of anticipation and dread. This was it, the moment that would determine if their plan had any chance of success. They watched in silence, waiting to see if the decoy would attract the containment team's attention. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity. Finally, a faint shimmer appeared in the distance, the unmistakable sign of an Oranian containment vessel. Jake's heart pounded as he gripped Zephyr's hand, both of them frozen in place as the vessel scanned the area, its sensors probing the empty warehouse. Then, with a soft hum, the vessel shifted course, moving toward the decoy. Zephyr let out a quiet sigh of relief, her grip on Jake's hand tightening. "It's working," she whispered, her voice filled with cautious hope. "They've taken the bait." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on the vessel as it drifted further away, disappearing into the distance. But even as relief washed over him, a new worry took root. They'd bought themselves time, but the containment team would soon realize the deception. They had only a narrow window to escape, and they would need every second of it. They made their way back to the city, slipping through shadows and side streets to avoid detection. Zephyr's hand remained in his, a steadying presence as they moved with quiet urgency, their breaths coming in soft, controlled gasps. Jake's mind raced, formulating their next steps, but the simple act of holding her hand grounded him, a reminder of why he was fighting so hard to keep her safe. When they reached his apartment, they wasted no time gathering supplies, packing essentials for a journey that would take them far from the city's reach. Zephyr worked quickly, her movements efficient yet laced with a sense of finality. Jake felt the weight of their choices settle over him, a quiet resolve filling the space between them. "Jake," Zephyr said, her voice breaking the silence. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "There's something you should know. If my people discover we've formed a bond, they won't just erase your memories or leave you behind. They'll see you as a threat. They'll pursue you until every trace of our connection is wiped clean." Jake met her gaze, his voice steady. "I know the risks, Zephyr, but I'm not leaving you. Whatever happens, I'll face it with you." Her expression softened, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow in her eyes. "Thank you, Jake. I never imagined that anyone would care enough to risk so much for me." She paused, her hand reaching up to brush his cheek. "But this bond we share, it goes beyond my people's understanding. It's something rare, something they fear." Jake placed his hand over hers, his gaze unwavering. Then let's show them that this bond makes us stronger, not weaker. Together, we're more than what they see. In that quiet moment, they shared a silent promise, a vow forged in the depths of their connection and the trials they faced together. It was a pact unspoken yet unbreakable, a commitment to protect each other against all odds. As dawn broke, casting a soft glow over the city, they slipped out of the apartment, leaving behind the life Jake had once known. Together, they would face the unknown, an alliance bound by trust, resilience, and a connection that transcended the boundaries of their worlds. And as they disappeared into the distance, the containment team's vessel hovered near the decoy, its scanners probing, its sensors alert. It was only a matter of time before they realized the ruse and resumed their hunt, but for now, Jake and Zephyr had escaped, two souls united in defiance, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them beyond the horizon.